£1 billion. That's how much interest Manchester United has paid since the Glazer family took over in 2005. More than the GDP of some small countries, and the club itself earned every penny of it. In 2005, the takeover cost £790 million, funded entirely by debt loaded onto the club. Before the Glazers, United was debt-free. Today, the gross debt is larger than it was at the takeover. A child's matchday ticket has more than doubled. Concessions scrapped. A promised new stadium. Nothing built, no planning, no financing. Yet by every financial measure, the Glazers won. They still hold 68% of the voting power. They've collected dividends. They've paid themselves fees, and the club's own revenue, your ticket, your shirt, your subscription, has serviced that debt for 2 decades. How did a family with no football history drain a global giant using its own money? The answer is not what you'd expect. It starts with a man who built an empire on a single rule. A rule that would eventually turn a football club into a cash machine. The Glazers had never kicked a ball, never owned a club, never even sat in the stands. But they saw something others missed. Manchester United wasn't a football club. It was a cash machine. In 2005, they bought it for £790 million. That's a fortune. But here's the twist. They didn't spend a penny of their own money. They borrowed the entire sum, then loaded that debt onto the club itself. The club's own revenue, ticket sales, TV rights, shirt deals, would now pay the interest. Every goal, every trophy, every fan's loyalty became a payment to the banks. This is a leveraged buyout. A financial trick where the target pays for its own takeover. The Glazers put up almost nothing. Manchester United took on everything. The debt grew. The interest piled up. By January 2026, the club would have paid over £1 billion in interest alone, more than the GDP of some small countries. And the debt? Still larger than when they started. The family with no football history now owned a global giant. But how exactly did they pull off this financial magic trick? The takeover cost £790 million, funded entirely by debt loaded onto the club. But here's the twist. The Glazers didn't pay a penny of that debt themselves. Instead, they turned Manchester United's own revenue into a repayment machine. Every season ticket renewal, every shirt sale, every broadcast check. The club's bankers took the first slice. By January 2026, the interest alone had passed £1 billion. That's more than the GDP of some small countries. Yet the gross debt still stands larger than at the takeover itself. The club borrowed to buy itself, then paid interest on that borrowing with its own earnings. Fans became unwilling lenders. Ticket prices soared. Concessions were scrapped. The promised new stadium, no planning application, no financing, nothing built. The money didn't go to players, facilities, or the community. It went to service a debt that should never have existed. Therefore, the real cost wasn't just financial, it was the erosion of trust, the hollowing out of a club's soul. What was the real cost of this debt to the club and its supporters? Subscribe to uncover how money reshapes the games we love. Over £1 billion in interest and dividends have been extracted from the club since 2005. To understand how the Glazer family used a leveraged buyout in 2005 to take over Manchester United, and how the club's own revenue has serviced that debt ever since. By January 2026, the interest the club has paid since the takeover passed £1 billion, with a further £166 million in dividends. Gross debt at 31st of March 2026 stood at £752.6 million, larger than at the takeover itself. The Glazers still hold 67.91% of the voting power, and a special resolution lock that means Sir Jim Ratcliffe, despite investing about $1.3 billion for roughly 28%, cannot buy control. Meanwhile, a child's matchday ticket rose from £25 to £66, a 164% increase. Concessions were scrapped, and the promised £2 billion new stadium has no planning application, no financing, and nothing built. You have to look past the surface. The same pattern shows up again and again, and its effects compound the longer it runs. But where did all that money go, and who benefited? Picture this. A billionaire walks in, writes a check for a fortune, and walks out with less than a third of the power. That is the reality Sir Jim Ratcliffe faced. He invested heavily, enough to buy a small country's entire airline, yet the Glazers still hold the keys. The reason is a special resolution lock, a legal tripwire buried in the club's constitution. It means any attempt to remove the board or change ownership requires a vote of at least 75%. The Glazers control just under 68% of the voting power. Therefore, even if every other shareholder united, they could never reach that threshold. Ratcliffe's billions bought him a seat at the table, but the table itself belongs to the family. He cannot force a sale, cannot appoint a majority of directors, cannot even block the Glazers from taking more dividends. The club's own revenue continues to flow out year after year, and no amount of cash from the outside can stop it. The lock is absolute. So what does this mean for the future of the club? The debt had to be serviced. Therefore, the club turned to its most loyal asset, the fans. Ticket prices climbed year after year. Concessions for children and pensioners were quietly scrapped. A family day out at Old Trafford now costs a fortune, and the experience keeps shrinking. The club promised a new stadium, a gleaming symbol of ambition. But no planning application was ever filed. No financing was secured. Nothing was built. The promise remains a promise, while the debt keeps compounding. Fans protested, marched, and even forced matches to be postponed. Yet the Glazers held firm. They still control the voting power. A special resolution lock means no minority investor can force a change. Sir Jim Ratcliffe bought a stake, but he cannot buy control. Therefore, the structure remains intact. The club generates enormous revenue, but that revenue flows out as interest and dividends, not into the squad or the stands. The question hangs in the air. Is there any hope for change, or is this the new normal? So the debt hasn't shrunk, it's grown. By March 2026, gross debt stood at £752.6 million, larger than the day the Glazers walked in. The club's own revenue paid for that expansion. Every pound of profit rerouted. The promised $2 billion stadium. No planning application, no financing, nothing built. Just a rendering on a slide. Sir Jim Ratcliffe invested roughly $1.3 billion for 28% of the club, but the Glazers still hold 67.91% of the voting power. A special resolution lock means Ratcliffe cannot buy control. He can pour money in. He cannot take the wheel. Meanwhile, a child's matchday ticket rose from £25 to £66, a 164% increase. Concessions were scrapped. The family that never kicked a ball now charges families more to watch theirs. The club generates enormous revenue. But that revenue flows out as interest, dividends, and fees. The machine keeps running, the debt keeps compounding, and the owners face no pressure to sell. 20 years of extraction, no end in sight. The question hangs in the air, unanswered. Can the Glazers' grip ever be broken? So how did a family with no football history drain a global giant using its own money? The answer is brutally simple. They bought the club with the club's own future earnings. A leveraged buyout, £790 million in debt, loaded onto Manchester United itself. The club didn't just pay for its own takeover, it paid for it over and over again. By January 2026, interest alone had passed £1 billion, more than the GDP of some small countries. And that's before the £166 million in dividends. The debt, still larger than it was in 2005. Meanwhile, a child's matchday ticket rose from £25 to £66, concessions scrapped. The promised $2 billion stadium, no planning application, no financing, nothing built. The lesson is uncomfortable. The very financial engineering that made the takeover possible, the leveraged buyout, became the club's permanent